15 young women sat at a long table crying as they ate. Every single meal could be their last. They weren't prisoners of war. They were Adolf Hitler's human shield, forced to taste his food for poison, because the dictator was terrified of being assassinated. The year was 1942. Deep inside the forests of East Prussia sat a hidden compound called the Wolf's Lair. Inside its walls, Hitler ran the war on the Eastern Front. Every single day before he touched his plate, 15 ordinary women had to eat first. No soldier stood between Hitler and death. These women did. One of these women was Margot Wilk, a young secretary from Berlin. Her apartment had just been destroyed in an Allied bombing raid. With nowhere left to live, she moved in with her mother-in-law in a quiet village near the Wolf's Lair. She thought she was safe there. She was wrong. Nazi officials came searching for local women to fill a secret role. Margot was chosen. She was never asked. She was told. No explanation was given at first. Only a truck arriving before dawn and armed guards waiting outside her door. She would soon learn the truth. She was about to become one of Hitler's personal poison shields, and there was no way to refuse. To understand why this program existed, you have to understand the mind of the man at the center of it. Adolf Hitler trusted almost no one. He believed British intelligence agents were hunting for a way to slip poison into his food. He refused ordinary kitchen staff. He refused his own generals access to his meals. Every ingredient was tracked. Every cook was watched. His fear wasn't ordinary caution. It was constant obsessive dread that shaped every meal of his life. Doctors surrounded him daily, pumping him with injections and pills he trusted more than food, yet the one thing closest to his own survival. His plate was handed to 15 young women first. If the poison was real, they would die, so he never would. The compound itself was built to disappear. Hidden inside the Masurian forest, the Wolf's Lair looked like nothing from above. Camouflage netting covered every bunker. Fake trees and painted rooftops fooled enemy planes flying overhead. Concrete walls up to 8 feet thick protected the inner ring where Hitler slept and worked. Barbed wire minefields and 3 separate security zones surrounded the compound. Nobody entered without being searched. Nobody left without permission. It wasn't just a headquarters. It was a fortress built entirely around one man's fear of dying. And somewhere inside this maze of concrete and wire, a small kitchen held 15 women whose only job was to risk their lives before his. Every morning before sunrise, a military truck rolled into the village. Margot and the other women climbed inside in silence. Nobody spoke on the ride. Nobody needed to. They already knew what was waiting. At the kitchen barracks, SS guards checked names off a list. The women sat together at the long table. Steaming plates were placed in front of them. This was not breakfast. This was a test they had no choice but to take 3 times a day for years. Some of the women were barely out of their teens. Some had husbands fighting hundreds of miles away who had no idea what their wives were doing every single day. There was no badge of honor in this work, only silence guards and the smell of food they were terrified to swallow. The food itself told its own story. Hitler was a strict vegetarian, obsessed with health and purity. His meals came from a private organic garden grown specifically for him, free of pesticides and untouched by outside hands. Rice, fresh vegetables, stewed fruit, and delicate pastries filled the women's plates. It should have felt like a privilege. Outside those walls, German and Polish families were starving. Ration cards controlled every gram of bread. Meat was a memory for most of the country. Yet inside the Wolf's Lair, 15 women ate like royalty while praying they would live long enough to feel hungry again tomorrow. Every bite was abundance. Every bite was also a gamble with death. After the last bite, the real horror began. The women were led into a bare waiting room and locked inside for 1 full hour. No doctor stood by to help them. No exit existed if something went wrong. They sat watching each other's faces, searching for the first sign of poison. A stomach cramp, a dizzy spell, a moment of silence held too long. Margot later said the hour never got easier, no matter how many times she lived through it. Some of the women cried quietly. Others sat frozen, staring at the wall, refusing to speak. If one of them collapsed, there was nothing anyone could do but watch. And when the hour finally ended and no one had died, the food was cleared and sent by car to Hitler's table. He never knew their names. He never once saw their faces. He simply trusted that if they were still breathing, his meal was safe. By the summer of 1944, the terror inside the Wolf's Lair reached a new level. On July 20th, a briefcase bomb planted by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg exploded inside the conference barracks just steps from where the women worked. The blast tore through the room, killing several officers. Hitler survived with only minor injuries, but the paranoia that followed was immediate and total. Security tripled overnight. Guards searched every corner of the compound. Suspicion fell on anyone with access to food supplies. For the 15 women already living under constant threat of poison, the compound now felt like a trap tightening around them. If Hitler could almost die from a bomb inside his own headquarters, what chance did they have if anything ever went wrong with a single plate of food? By January 1945, the Red Army was closing in fast from the east. The Wolf's Lair was evacuated and destroyed with explosives, so it would never fall into Soviet hands. For the 15 women, their strange and terrifying assignment was suddenly over, but safety was nowhere close. Margot was warned by a German officer who knew what Soviet soldiers did to women connected to Hitler's inner circle. He helped her board a train alone heading toward Berlin just before the front collapsed completely. She never saw the other 14 women again. She never learned exactly what happened to them. She only carried the fear of what she believed was true for the rest of her life. Margot Volk believed the other 14 women were captured by Soviet troops and executed within days, accused of being close to Hitler himself. For nearly 70 years, she told no one her story, not her second husband, not her closest friends. The memory of that locked waiting room stayed buried until 2012, when, at 95 years old, she finally spoke. Her words shocked the world. A quiet secretary from Berlin had spent years risking her life for a man she never once met face to face. Margot died 2 years later in 2014, the last living witness to one of history's strangest and cruelest assignments. 15 women sat at that table. Only one lived long enough to tell the world what silence had cost them.